And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Welcome to Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I am Russell Brown. Joining me today, as always, on a Tuesday night to record for you, CP Christian Page. CP, how we doing, my man?
Doing well. Just another week into the right direction of the NFL Draft.
Yes, sir. 30 days away. This is episode 90 of the podcast. If you have not checked out the most recent one, you can do so by going to iTunes or checking out Google Play. Go to Spreaker.com. Very simple. Search Cover One NFL Draft Podcast, and it will all be there for you. Yesterday, I had spoken with PJ Locke, safety from Texas. Really just humble young man that is really looking forward to participating in the pro day tomorrow for Texas. I don't think he's gotten enough buzz. But again, I don't watch every single player at every position. So for me, I haven't watched Darnell Savage. So PJ Locke right now is ranked where Darnell Savage is not, where other guys like Marquise Blair, I've only watched one game, maybe 2 games. I'm not looking at my charts here, but 1 or 2 games, not enough to be putting a grade on a guy. And PJ Locke is a player I watched 5-6 games of. I have a grade on him. Is he the highest ranked safety I have? No, he's my lowest ranked safety, but I still believe his versatility and everything puts him in a spot to start in the league. So you can check that out. And it's a good interview. He's really just down-to-earth guy and really humble and just ready to get going for tomorrow. So, but let's jump into what we've got going on today. We're going to talk the AFC East. Potentially, if we have time, we'll bring up a prospect or two that we've been watching. But we are going to be talking prospects simply for the AFC East and the team needs for all 4 teams from the Patriots, the Dolphins, the Bills, and the Jets. But before we get into that, Rob Gronkowski, that's been the big news in 2 weeks in a row. We've been pretty much hit with big-time news from Odell Beckham Jr. being traded to Rob Gronkowski now retiring from the New England Patriots, 29 years of age. He'll be 30 here in a couple of weeks. Your take on him retiring, and is this a good move on him? We'll get into what the Patriots do, but just really overall what you think of Rob Gronkowski's retirement.
It doesn't come away too surprising to me. I just think, the murmurings have kind of always been there that, well, is Gronk going to play 1 more year? And we heard this a couple years ago. And, of course, we know when he went under the knife and he had an infection in his arm or this, that, and the other and not stringing together, really 16 games outside of his first 2 seasons in the league. But when you see him put on a show in the playoffs, and then that's when you come away and we're like, well, he left off on a really good note. So I think that may be the surprising part, but the guy had a decorated career, obviously multiple Super Bowl champion, and the guys he changed kind of the tight end position overall. Sure, he's not the super athletic tight end, that you're going to consistently see, but he is a consistent and reliable pass catcher. Talking about, was it the right or wrong decision for him? I don't think there's really a way to say one side or the other, because I think if he met his criteria, hey, I put myself in a Hall of Fame position. I won multiple Super Bowls. I got to play with one of the best quarterbacks ever. I think he checked all the boxes you can as an NFL football player. So I don't think it's really a bad look on his end. Now, it puts New England maybe in a hole, but they have had some time in his vacancies when he's been dealing with injuries to find certain replacements. Now, have they found that replacement? Not necessarily. They're probably going to have to look toward the draft, but we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Yeah, and we'll jump into that here momentarily. And I when I saw the news, it was like, wow, it's just more so like, wow, it's actually happening. And this is a guy that's played in 115 games. He has started in 102 games, but on top of all that, he's played a full season in the postseason. And there was 2 years where he didn't play at all because of injuries. So, he played in 16 games in the postseason, probably would be closer to 20 had he have played in 2013 and 2016 in those postseasons. Both of those seasons he was plagued with the injuries. But, 521 career receptions, 79 touchdowns, which is just insane. But then just in the postseason alone, 81 receptions, over 1,100 yards, and 12 touchdowns. I mean, some receivers don't do that in their career, yet alone in a single season. This guy, no doubt, is a first-ballot Hall of Famer. And, I don't care about the off-the-field stuff of him, wilding out on a boat or having a porn star for a girlfriend or a stripper for a girlfriend or whatever. Like, I don't really care about that stuff. It's just this guy was fantastic on the field, and, it's going to suck not seeing him on the field. But, like, if you're a Bills fan, which we have this strong Bills following on the show, they've got to be a little bit thrilled to know that, hey, one of the dominoes fall. Maybe next it will be Brady, and then maybe it'll be Belichick, and then maybe things in the AFC East will take shape in a different way. So let's jump in with the Patriots, and how does it change for them, and what do they do? Because they are, as we know, of course, picking 32nd overall in the draft. There's definitely a need for a tight end. There's 3 tight ends that I think could go in the first round. I think we're in agreement there. But they also pick at 56, 64, 74. They've got a lot of options to go tight end. But what direction do you think they go at 32 and maybe just throughout the rest of the draft?
I feel like whatever we think the Patriots are going to do, think the complete opposite, because it never falls that way. Now, because, the Sony Michel pick kind of caught me by surprise last year. That turned out to be a home run pick that puts them in the right direction offensively. But, it just depends on maybe how you think about this tight end class. If you're looking at pick 32 with the Patriots, you expect the Iowa tight end duo of T.J. Hawkinson and Noah Fant to be off the board. Just based on how they looked at the combine and just their whole body of work. Irv Smith Jr. out of Alabama, that's probably the guy you have to circle here for New England. I think he played in an offense that is very translatable from Alabama style to what New England likes to run under Josh McDaniels. So I think if you put him in that role, I don't think the learning curve's that steep for a guy coming out of Alabama. His ability to block, his ability to stretch the field, make those contested catches. So if they feel comfortable drafting a tight end that high, I definitely think Irv Smith's the answer. But if you look toward just sticking on the tight ends, if you look kind of further along in the draft, how good do you feel about this tight end class? And I'll let you have that question, because when you're looking at potential, 3rd or 4th round guys, the strength of the class, I think there's a huge gap once you get away from the Iowa duo and Irv Smith Jr., because you're looking at guys like Mack out of Notre Dame, Jay Sternberger from Texas A&M, Dawson Knox. I know there's a lot of athleticism to like there, but the guy never caught a touchdown at Ole Miss. That's going to be a red flag, not necessarily to me, but when you're looking at evaluators, how much stock can we put in this guy? And then you're looking at maybe more of a primary blocker like a Drew Sample than Josh Oliver, who you like his athleticism, but I think I was a little underwhelmed at the Senior Bowl. I think both of us were. So it may just depend on how you feel about this tight end class after those, top 3, top 4 guys.
Well, I certainly like this group. I think that's no secret. I'm really high on all of these guys. T.J. Hawkinson, my top-ranked tight end, followed by Noah Fant and then Irv Smith. But, you could even throw Caden Smith from Stanford into the mix as well. And I've actually got Chase Sternberger written down here for them. And I'm just throwing kind of names at a dartboard here, I guess, and maybe praying for them to go about this. But Dalton Reisner, I think, is a player that they could consider at 32 if he's there. I don't know if he will be. I don't think he will be. But, again, it's a guessing game. So if he is there, I would not be surprised if that's a guy that they look at. They've lost Trent Brown. They do have Isaiah Wynn coming back, but he's coming back from an injury. But Reisner's kind of he's just one of those guys that, fits what you're looking to do from a athletic standpoint. I think he's versatile enough, and that's something that they really, I think, key in on guys like Isaiah Wynn. That versatility was huge for him, and they're going to play him at left tackle regardless of myself and plenty of others thinking he could play interior offensive line and just dominate. He's going to still be very good at left tackle, but Reisner could certainly be that guy for them. But Chase Sternberger, I think, is a player that probably will go much higher than maybe the film will allow it. I know he was productive this past season for Texas A&M, and I know he tested really well at the combine, but is he a guy that you would take let's say 56 or 64. For most teams, maybe not. Maybe he's more of a third-round pick, like 74 or something like that. But I'm assuming he's going to go much sooner. Like he did run a 4.7 5.40, which isn't fantastic. Only 17 reps in the bench. 3-cone drill was 7.19. Vertical jump was only 31.5. But the size is there at 6'4", 251. And I just think for what they look to do, I think he's somewhat of a fit for what they're trying to do. And plus, he's just a productive receiver that can get vertical up the field. So, or a productive tight end that can turn into a receiver going up the field. So, I think they would go, Reisner, Sternberger, and then maybe even Chase Winovich is a player that they could consider as well. I know they lost Trey Flowers, and Winovich and Flowers are two different types of player, but if you're looking to get after the quarterback, well, I think Chase Winovich's one of those guys. And I do believe, and I like that the buzz on Chase is starting to pick up, which granted I wrote about back in November. There is this rumor going around that he could fall into the first round, and many people think it could be the Steelers. It could be a team like Philly. It could be a team like even the Patriots. It could be Green Bay. There's a lot of different teams that could be interested in him. I think the Patriots could certainly be interested in him. So it'll be interesting to see how they go about it. But I think offensive line, tight end, and edge rusher are probably the two spots that they go. But the Dolphins, this is a team that is just an absolute mess at 13. And it's crazy. Like a lot of the teams in these divisions are relatively close, like on the board. Like Detroit and Green Bay, they pick 4 or 5 spots away from each other. Then you get to Minnesota, and then you would get to Chicago. And again, that's like 4 or 5 spots away. Chicago obviously doesn't have that first-round pick. So a lot of the divisions are relatively close together. There's just a huge gap here because the Patriots are so good. The Dolphins pick at 13. What do you think they do? Do they tank for Tua here? Do they move up and get a quarterback? Do they just sit at 13 and wait for one to fall? What's going to happen with this team?
Yeah, there's a lot of needs for Miami that they haven't really tackled in this offseason, the free agency period. Obviously, you talk about Ryan Tannehill, moving to be a backup under Marcus Mariota at Tennessee. Even though they signed Ryan Fitzpatrick for a couple years, we all know that's not a long-term thing, obviously. They don't re-sign Juwan James, the right tackle. Sure, he got paid a lot more than he was probably worth, but that's the kind of money that position makes nowadays. So they have to find somebody to pair with Laramie Tunsil. So hopefully they can find a situation where maybe a right tackle falls into their lap. We're talking about Jawan Taylor, Jonah Williams, or you may have to, if depending on where you value Dalton Reisner, you're just talking about him, the right tackle or offensive lineman, we'll classify him as, from Kansas State. He could be a solid pick at 13. Is it a little rich? Probably, but the guy's a baller. I mean, his film definitely checks everything you want, and just a true, whether if you want him as a blindside protector or if you want him on the right side. But then if you're also just looking at needs here, wide receiver, Danny Amendola's not there any longer. Devontae Parker, I think he inked a 2-year deal, but he's been very ineffective really for them based on what he was valued at as that top pick for Miami a few years back. And then, you're looking at defensive end. Cameron Wake was already on the older end of the age spectrum, but now he goes to Tennessee to be on that defensive line. And then Robert Quinn, we don't know, but he's not as effective as he was with the Rams in recent years. And then there's another need when you talk about, just defensive line as a whole, because Charles Harris, the once first-round pick out of Mizzou, he just hasn't been good. Only 3 sacks in the past couple of years. I know there's been some injuries there, but still, Miami has to find ways. And I list all those because I don't know what the answer is. Because so I just kind of made my case that the floor is yours, but they have so many options, or so many, I guess, bad options, I should say, to do what they want to do at 13, because they could look at a quarterback, but there is a little bit of leverage there, and maybe a bridge from the next guy if you're talking about, Tua Tagovailoa out of Alabama next year. But I think they need to probably solidify up front first and look at that right tackle position, because we did talk about it. And though I may not necessarily agree when I was saying there's not a lot of offensive tackle needy teams, I should have phrased it in a way, I don't think that many are going to be off the board. But now when you come to realization of free agency shakeup and everything, Miami's probably in that position where they may have to reach on a tackle. And maybe they have a fortunate situation where Jawan Taylor or Jonah Williams slips to them, how they value Cody Ford. Is he a true offensive tackle? And then where they see Dalton Reisner, maybe even a guy that, neither one of us like, but Greg Little. I think that's crazy at 13, but it seems like there might be some buzz around them. So I think Miami should probably address up front, but I definitely understand they want to look toward quarterback as well.
I think, all of those positions are certainly areas of needs for them, and they just they have to do something though at quarterback. And I think at 13, if there's one that falls to you, whether it is Daniel Jones, whether it is Drew Lock, and I think Drew Lock's going 10 to Denver, and he might even go sooner than that, maybe New York. But even if Dwayne Haskins falls, if one of these guys fall, which maybe it doesn't happen, but if it does, then I just feel like you have to take them. You can't not take one of them. Your quarterback room is literally like Luke Falk and what, Chad Henne or something. Like, it's absolutely terrible. And they've just got to be able to do something with this group. And maybe they don't do it at 13. Maybe they wait till 79 or 117 and they take Ryan Finley, or which would be just terrible. But if they did that, or maybe they look at Jared Stidham or Clayton Thorson. I think there's options for them in the later rounds, but that's basically being in the same room as you have now with Jake Rudock and Luke Falk. So it's legitimately the same thing if you were to go out and get one of those guys. But edge rusher is probably the most common choice for them, I would say, whether it's Rashawn Gary or Montez Sweat or Brian Burns if he's there, maybe even Cleveland Farrell. I don't know. Maybe it's one of those four guys that they take at 13. I like the thought of an offensive lineman. I don't know if Jonah Williams will be there. I don't think he should be there. I don't think Jawan Taylor should be there. But if they are there, one of them obviously make a ton of sense. Cody Ford, I would have no issues with them taking him and playing him at right tackle. But if they wanted to wait till 48 and they wanted to wait for maybe a Yadni Kajust who's been lost in the shuffle, or Greg Little if he is there, again, those would be probably two guys that I would consider if I were them. So they've got needs all over the place. I don't think it would be a bad thing as long as they're not drafting, or honestly probably just not drafting a receiver at 13. I know it's a need, but wait till 79, 117 or something to do that. You shouldn't be drafting any tight ends. You shouldn't be drafting running backs. So I think at 13 it's probably just best edge rusher or best offensive lineman as the safe pick. But if you're looking to – and depending on what quarterback's there. So we'll see what they do. But the Bills, they are sitting there on the clock at number 9. Obviously, we've got to get this pick right. We've got to say the right names because our comments are probably going to be filled with a lot of hate if we pick the wrong guy. So I'll leave this one for you, my man.
Oh, so you can throw me under the bus.
Exactly.
No, and I was joking with you before we hit the record button here that it seems like every offseason need that Buffalo had, they pretty much tackled this offseason, which kudos to Brandon Beane and that organization of, and even I think it was kind of a win in the whole Antonio Brown situation of what the information we know that they did not really – so they said, hey, if Antonio doesn't want to be a part of it, we'll find some other guys. And they sat there and inked up guys like Cole Beasley and John Brown. And sure, they could maybe look for more dynamic receivers, but I still think that position group is fine and they're doing a great job at surrounding young quarterback Josh Allen with enough talent around them. I just think the only vacant spot there is that tackle position. What are they going to do beyond Dawkins? He's an okay piece. They feel like he's good enough that they can move on with him going forward as they dumped pretty much everybody else on the offensive line. But I really like some of their moves talking about, Mitch Morse, the center from Kansas City, and even depth pieces like John Feliciano that came over from Oakland and Adrian Waddle that was a kind of a backup swing tackle from New England. So they put pieces in place to kind of, if they don't like their tackle position or if their tackle options at pick 9, they have enough there to be like, hey, maybe we can wait a round or two because they have pick 40, so they don't have to wait too long. But I still think every offseason need they had, I think they kind of solidified. And sure, they can always upgrade it. They can get younger and everything like that. But I think if you're just looking at pick 9, I think offensive tackle is probably the need. Now you just have to figure out if you want the left or right side. But beyond Dawkins, I think there's enough comfort there that they can look whoever falls to them at 9, and then they can figure out the situation once they're both in camp.
Well, on tankathon.com, it's a great resource if you've never seen it. It's got the draft order for your team and the current just overall draft order. But like their mock draft selection for them, there are 3 rounds: Jonah Williams, N'Keal Harry, and Darrell Henderson. So like you got an offensive lineman, you got a receiver, you got a running back, and that pretty much leaves you 113 to 230 to draft, which is 7 other picks. To take defensive players and maybe, throw in an interior offensive lineman or something, or a tight end or something along those lines, which is perfectly fine. But if your picks, you have essentially 3 picks in the top 75, I think you've got to hit those picks. And that's obvious, right? And it's a lot harder to do than said, but I think it's teams make it a lot harder than it needs to be. But they really could be a team that just goes best player available, whether that is Ed Oliver defensively, if he's on the board at 9, if it is an offensive lineman like Jonah Williams or something, that makes a lot of sense. But it really wouldn't surprise me. And I know they added John Brown and Cole Beasley, but those are guys like, and I know Eric's going to listen to this, and I know he's going to DM me shortly after he hears it. And I'm going to say those guys are, John Brown's a flyer up the field. Cole Beasley's like a gadget player across the middle. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying that, because that's exactly how they've been utilized their entire career. Could they provide more than that? Absolutely, probably. But again, I'm sure Eric's going to be like, well, that's wrong, blah, blah, blah. But that's fine. It would not surprise me, though, if they – and I said this on ESPN Rochester a few weeks back. I would not be surprised if he was on the board, DK Metcalf, if that was their guy. I know that sounds crazy, but, that's your true number one, and that's what they are missing offensively. You are missing that true number one receiver. And I know Zay Jones is okay, solid number 2, number 3 guy. You throw in John Brown at 4, and then you have Cole Beasley at 2 or 3 as well. You need that number 1 guy that can really be that piece that you really are missing for Josh Allen. And I think Metcalf would be a perfect fit. So I don't Jonah Williams obviously would be choice A because it's a safer pick because of the Alabama ties to Brian Dabble. But Metcalf would just be, he's a freak, and it would be like having almost like your poor man Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, or whatever you would want to call it. And another option too would be Hakeem Butler, who's kind of like a mini Calvin Johnson in a way. So there would be some things that they can consider there, and I think a receiver's that position. So we'll see what they do. The Jets, they pick 3rd. There's been rumors and rumblings that they want out of this draft pick. Would not surprise me. And a lot of it's because they only have 6 picks in this draft. Maybe they like Josh Allen, but maybe they like Rashawn Gary a little bit more, or Brian Burns, and they feel like if they can move back with a team that would like a quarterback, whether that is the New York Giants or maybe the Denver Broncos, they move back 3 to 7 spots, and they go ahead and they allow a team to move up and get their quarterback, and then that puts an edge rusher or a defensive tackle right in their lap. So at 3 for now, what do you think they do?
I think just depending on how the board shakes out, and you can just kind of let, a best player available situation here fall in your lap, because I know there's, some cornerback needs, depending on what they do with Morris Claiborne. He's not fantastic anyway, so he could probably be upgraded. Jermaine Johnson, fine, so you need to find somebody on the opposite end for him. Their edge presence, they're an okay pass rushing team, but they definitely need some help. So Josh Allen would make a lot of sense. Who knows? Nick Bosa could be in a situation like that. But I think I like the Brian Burns fit, so they would have to trade out. Of course, going number 3 overall is very rich for me for Brian Burns, especially if you may, kind of indicate a position change if you take him more off the ball. But I think he adds a pass rushing element that you could use. He adds some length out there as well. And then we talked about it, a couple weeks ago after the combine. He looked very fluid, in coverage drills and just moving laterally and everything. So from just a scheme and just an overall fit, I'm glad you brought up Brian Burns, the player out of Florida State, because I think he fits the mold of what New York could use here, because he brings some pass rushing elements and he also brings some linebacker help, even though they did sign C.J. Mosley, but he's going to play more on the inside. I think kind of shoring up one of those outside positions would be a really good spot if Burns was going to be the pick And I know you said if they stay at number 3, but if they don't, I think Burns would be a solid pick for them. But I think Josh Allen could also add that element if they do stay at 3. So I think maybe anybody with the molds of Josh Allen, Brian Burns, kind of that versatile can play off the edge, can drop into coverage, and you don't really feel, that he's going to be a liability in coverage. He can be on the field for all 3 downs. I think that's the direction New York should go in round 1.
Yeah, and they've spent a ton of money too, and it's Le'Veon Bell, it's C.J. Mosley. There's so much money that they've tossed around, and I know I'm missing probably a couple of other players like Jamison Crowder and things like that, but like they're a team that very well could just go best player available, how the board shakes up. I like the trade back thing for them. They don't have a second round pick, and there's a huge gap. I mean, like we talked about, essentially the Buffalo Bills, 3 picks in the top 75. Well, in the top 75, the Jets have 2 picks, 3 and 68. I mean, that's a 65-player gap between your first pick and your second pick. So you've obviously you've got to strike with your first pick. And then when you get to that pick 68, it's obviously got to be a good player as well. And you need those day one guys. But if you're talking about trading back and you're talking about maybe trading Darren Lee, well, then I think, and I know you have CJ Mosley now. Lee has not been performing well, but still that's a depth player at the linebacker position. Maybe they could consider a Devin White or a Devin Bush. I doubt it. I don't think you would double dip into linebacker, especially at middle linebacker, but crazier things have happened. But either way, I think trading back, and I think we're going to see trades happen. So if they need a team that is looking for that quarterback, I think that's the way that they are going to go. They traded up last year. I think they could trade back this year and just really go best player available. Maybe it is Metcalf. Maybe it's Jonah Williams. Maybe it's Brian Burns. I think those would be probably the top 3 players at number 3 for them on their board that fits them the best. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Jets stayed put and just shocked the world and took Rashawn Gary. It really wouldn't surprise me. It just wouldn't. I think that's a move that either the Jets or the Giants would make. With the way that both of those organizations have been ran the last few years, I think that would be 2 moves that they would make. So I don't know. We'll see, I guess. But
one more quick thing to add about the Jets. You're talking about whether them staying put. It depends on how much they value the other cornerback position. If maybe they sign Morris Claiborne, for a 1 year, just small deal. He's not going to be worth that much. But, you're talking about they only have the 6 picks. They don't pick until their next pick at 68. And so you're looking at that round 3 range. And I can't remember if it was you or JR that tweeted out, it may have been both you guys, that that you have your handful of the top corners. But after that, there's a pretty significant drop off. So you're looking at guys from round 1 guys, if you traded back and get your hands on, Byron Murphy, Greedy Williams, DeAndre Baker. I think those cornerbacks are slowly falling based on, some of the free agent moves so far. But I think if you're looking at round 3 corners, possibly even round 4, I don't know how many guys that you're going to feel comfortable with putting in a starting position compared to those first-tier guys, because you're looking at, maybe a Joejuan Williams from Vanderbilt. If he doesn't go day 2, a lot of people like his length and overall athleticism. Julian Love out of Notre Dame, David Long out of Michigan, who had a good combine, but I think some of his film, it's kind of hard to correlate both of that. And then Michael Jackson out of Miami, and a guy I wrote on, Sean Bunting out of Central Michigan. So there are some options, but I think if they really value the cornerback position, they have to be careful, because there may not be a valuable starting cornerback later on, around the top 75, top 100 line that they may expect to be in that first round, of course. And obviously, so if they do trade out that number 3 spot, I wouldn't necessarily think, or I wouldn't put all my stock into them picking a pass rusher, because this cornerback class, I don't want to say consensus-wise, but it seems like it's getting that way, is quite thin when you're talking, when you group the first-tier guys to that second-tier guys. There's quite a bit of gap between the two. So don't rule out the Jets trading back to potentially pick up a cornerback to play alongside Tremaine Johnson.
Well, and you know what? You took legitimately the words right out of my mouth, and it would not surprise me for the New York Jets to move back from 3 to 10 to watch the Broncos move up from 10 to 3. The Broncos take Drew Lock at 3. Byron Murphy or Greedy Williams at 10 for the Jets. The Jets would acquire pick 41, probably a future pick next year and maybe the year after that or something along those lines from the Broncos. Because you got to remember, the Broncos, and we've talked about this on free agency stuff, they're in that win now mode. They're going to go out and they're going to try and do whatever they can to win now. I mean, they signed Juwan James. They went out and traded for Joe Flacco. They've essentially done everything that they possibly can. Kareem Jackson they signed. A 30-year-old corner they're giving a 3-year, $33 million deal. So they're doing everything that they can to win now. The Broncos, they want to win now. And I think the best bet for them is obviously to stay at 10 and probably take like a Devin Bush to play middle linebacker. But they moved on for Brandon Marshall. They still have Todd Davis. So to me, this is a team that's still going to be looking for that quarterback of the future because that's what Elway's going to do. You want to get your guy. He's going to be aggressive. That win now mode. You're going to move up. You're going to get your guy. And it just wouldn't surprise me at all if we saw the Jets and the Broncos trade spots. The Broncos give up pick 41 and the Jets get that. And then they would be sitting there with, picks pick 10, pick 41, pick 68. That looks a lot better than what they have now. And then they could really just adjust accordingly. And that 41, they could very well go pass rusher at that point. So there's a lot that they could do. And I'm with you. I think cornerback is very much in the cards for them as well, especially if at pick 10 or knowingly that if they got a feeling or a sense that there isn't going to be a corner taken in the top 10, they could very well be the team that takes one. And they've done it before. They've taken corners before in the top 10. So D. Milner's one of those guys. If they like a guy, hey, maybe they'll do it again. So that's it for the Jets, I think, unless you have anything else to add to any of those four teams that you've just thought of.
No, I think we covered pretty much all of it. I think the Jets definitely, though, are one of the more interesting teams. And so we could get a trade pretty early on that Thursday night of the draft, or if not, maybe even before then. It just depends on how it shakes up. But definitely think New York's one of those teams, along with Oakland, that picks right after them. I think those are two of the more intriguing teams when you're talking about top 5, top 10.
Yeah, and we could really see trades at pick 1, pick 3, pick 4. I mean, we really could. A team like teams like Miami, Denver, the Giants, if they're all bought in on their quarterbacks, well, hey, this is probably the way that they're going to have to do it because you never really know what other teams are thinking when it comes to quarterbacks. Cincinnati as well at 11. I know they have Andy Dalton, but they've got a new regime in there at coaching staff-wise. They could very well be looking at quarterback because Andy Dalton's not very good. So I don't know. We'll see how it shakes up, and we'll obviously get into more conferences later throughout the coming weeks, and we'll put everything and wrap it up on a bow and do some prospect rankings. But real fast, I just want to spend a few moments, talk some prospects that we've been watching over the last few days. I know you had wrote something about Titus Howard last week, which you guys can check out over at cover1.net. But also you were looking at some other small school players and just overall players in general. So what have you been coming across the last few days?
Yeah, I flipped sides of the ball. I looked a little bit at the offensive tackle, like you're talking about, Titus Howard, Alabama State, who's gaining a lot of buzz. So don't be surprised if the guy goes early day 2. I know that sounds a little rich, but he's a guy that got better and better at the Senior Bowl against top-tier competition, had a really solid game versus Auburn and some of those really good defensive linemen that will be on the field for the Tigers this year that we'll be talking about next year at this time. But I've switched sides of the ball. I'm looking more at the defensive line and the defensive tackles because I think this defensive tackle group, it's so interesting. It's very good, but it's so interesting because I think there's a little bit of difference between all these players. Obviously, you talk about Quinnen Williams. I think he's scheme versatile. You can line him up anywhere you want. You want him as a true nose tackle. You want him as a 3-tech or be like, Quinnen, whatever you want to do, you go do it. And that's pretty much what he did at Alabama, and it worked. But guys like Christian Wilkins, Ed Oliver's another guy kind of in that Quinnen Williams zone. We've talked about, can he play off-ball linebacker and this ludicrous stuff. I'm like, don't take him away of what he's best at because he's great. Even if he's going to be one of those guys that a lot of people look back and they're going to be like, oh, well, why was this guy a top 5, top 10 pick? He hasn't accumulated the stats that you've looked at. But the guy, I mean, it takes one quick look at the film and be like, this guy eats up so many double teams and opens up so many other opportunities for his teammates. Plus, Ed Oliver's also beating those double teams. So he's that valuable of a player. And then just some other players. Jeffrey Simmons, his story is interesting based on, some of the off-the-field stuff. But the guy's a dynamic player inside. One of those defensive tackles that you value with that pass rushing ability. So he's a guy that's definitely going to be still high on my board. Most likely will finish as a top 10 player, but I will factor in some of those off-the-field red flags as well. So I just like the defensive tackle class as a whole. While I'm putting my final touches on my overall grades, defensive tackle is one of the last few position groups I have left. So it's definitely a fun group to study because there's a lot of versatility and a lot of guys that are going to crack the top 50.
And I was going to ask you about that with the Jeff Simmons thing. I know the knee is going to put him down the draft board a little bit, but he's still got to go first round, right? That's going to happen.
I would think so. And I'm trying to think of a player that has had a similar, issue that's come up because, of course, I haven't talked to anybody at Mississippi State, but through the media members that have talked to some people that work closely with Mississippi State football and the athletic communication staffs, they say Jeffrey Simmons has been a great person. There's been nothing really since that occurrence took place that he has not had any issues whatsoever. So, there may be a team that is what? He's shown the maturity. He knows he messed up, and let's take a risk here. And a team that I don't have the picks in front of me, but the team that may have a lot of picks that can take more of a risk in the first round and they don't have too many needs. Jeffrey Simmons definitely makes sense, but it wouldn't surprise me if he made it outside the top 20. I just think sometimes when you turn on the tape, that carries a lot of validity there. But I definitely understand some of the off-field stuff, but I think he's cleared his name quite a bit in Starkville since that took place. So it would surprise me if he's not a top 20 pick still.
Yeah, this defensive tackle class is good, and I'm with you. I think Simmons goes in the first round. I don't know exactly where. There's plenty of teams that could look at him and say, hey, that's our guy. Seattle at 21. I know they cut ties with Malik McDowell, but they could still be looking at that interior pass rusher, run stuffer type of player, and Jeffrey Simmons is all of that and more. So I think that'd be a great fit for them. Even though some of the risks in taking a guy with that size and the torn ACL and everything, but again, phenomenal player. Just love everything about Jeffrey Simmons. I still think he's a top 5, top 10 player in this class, regardless. But I've been watching also. I know we talked about Miami Dolphins, and I'll say this real fast. You just mentioned Titus Howard, second round or early day 2, which is essentially second round. Pick 48 Miami Dolphins. Let's just roll with Titus Howard. Let's lock that in.
Let's do it.
But no, I was watching some defensive backs. I was going through doing some of my safety rankings. I might get to one more player like a Marquise Blair or something throughout the rest of the process. But really overall, I think I have 10 or 11 guys at the safety position ranked and ready to go. You'll see that on my overall big board where they fall. But I like the group. I don't love the group. I don't think it's as good as last year with Jesse Bates and Justin Reed and Derwin James and those guys, but I still think it's a good group. I like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson quite a bit. I think this guy's probably a late first-round pick somewhere. Taylor Rapp, I'm a big fan of him. I don't think I would take him in first round, but, early day 2 somewhere, absolutely. I like Jonathan Abram, especially with that aggressive box roll. I think that fits. I thought there was times that his lower body went a little crazy. But I was also just watching, before I went to Texas this past week at that wedding, I was watching just some random film like I always do, and I came across 2 names. One, Fresno State cornerback, I'm going to butcher the name, and Thulo Kelly, I believe that's his name, but very productive the last 2 years and has not been discussed at all. And there's a play against Arizona State. Now, it looks like Manny Wilkins does a really poor job just on the throw and long, elated throw where he's staring down the receiver, things like that. But Kelly does a really good job jumping on the pass. And last year he had 60 tackles, 4 picks with 153 return yards on that with 2 touchdowns and 16 pass deflections. And he had 24 pass deflections combined over the last 2 years. So he's a player that maybe goes as an undrafted player, but maybe he catches on with the team and we talk about him in 2 years. Dylan Mitchell, receiver out of Oregon, was finalizing some of the final touches on his film and grade. And I really liked him. I think he's probably a 3rd or 4th round guy, but I think he'd be really beneficial in Kansas City playing with Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, any receiver would be, but with the way Mahomes is so innovative and has an ability to extend plays, I think Mitchell would just do a really good job with that. I thought he did a good job with Herbert on those things. And then lastly, the other player is, and again, I might not butcher this one, Stanford cornerback Elijah Holder. He was a 2018 All Pac-12 honorable mention, 3-time Pac-12 All-Academic. So smart kid. He had 59 tackles this past year, 2 pass breakups, 2 career interceptions with 37 career games. So limited ball skills. But at the Combine, which he competed in and got completely overlooked, had a 6.73 cone drill, a 4.15 20-yard shuttle, 36-inch vertical, and a 4.6 40. So maybe not a player that stands out completely athletically, but again, maybe one of those late day 3 guys that catches on, fits a team's physical man scheme that they're looking for. Maybe a team like the Detroit Lions that love press corners, he might be a player that fits what they're looking for. Again, the 40 and the long speed is questionable, but it looked like he did pretty well at times on the film that I watched. Again, he's going to be one of those players that I watch 1 or 2 games. So you can check all that out at Russ NFL Draft on Twitter for more of it. That's where I got some of those clips posted. But yeah, I mean, dude, we're 30 days away, and that's it. And then we're on to next year.
Man, how about it?
I know. It's insane. But we'll get more into it later this week. Hopefully, we'll meet up again and we'll do another episode. I've got to talk with JR and see if he's ready to go for tomorrow. So, CP, where can we find you on Twitter, my man?
At _Christian Page, PAGE.
Guys, smash the follow button. CP is a must follow. Love when he's breaking down films and the prospects that he's watching. And the best thing is that he keeps to himself. It's drama-free stuff. It's good stuff. So make sure you follow CP. Again, follow me at Russ NFL Draft. And make sure you rate, subscribe, and comment on our podcast on iTunes, Google Play. That's the only way we can provide more content for you. So search it, find it, download it, subscribe, and love it. Cover One, the NFL Draft podcast. So CP, thanks for joining me. We will talk to you guys in a day or so. Until then, we've got you covered right here on Cover One, the NFL Draft podcast.